Hi everyone! Thank you for joining me here on Moonstone Makes. My name is Tommy. Today I'm going to talk about some books. Actually, today I'm going to be talking about a lot of books. 21 books. And that's because I skipped doing a wrap-up for May. So now this video is my reading wrap-up for May and June of this year. So these are all the books that I read over 2 months. It's 21 books, and I'm going to try to go through them really quickly because I want to tell you about them, but there's a lot of books. So I'm just going to get right into it. The first series of books that I read in May was Heartstopper. This is a graphic novel by Alice Osman. It's so far a series of 4 graphic novels. I read them all digitally because I couldn't find physical copies anywhere because they're super popular right now because of the TV show. And I read them probably in 2 days, and they're wonderful. Heartstopper is about 2 teenage boys. They go to high school together. Their names are Nick and Charlie, and it's about their relationship and how it develops. It's a coming-of-age queer romance. It's really great. It's really feel-good and wonderful and cute. It's just like so cute you want to die. You just want to keep reading and then you want to die. It's just adorable and wonderful. I highly recommend it. It's very feel-good. I tried to watch the TV show, but I wasn't that into it. If you've seen the TV show, I definitely recommend reading the graphic novels. I liked them a lot better. The illustration style is very kind of simple, and there's a lot of like empty space for you to like fill in with your own like emotions that it's drawing out of you. It's really nicely done. It's just a really like calming, wonderful read, and it's wonderful. Definitely recommend. If you're into high school romance, do it. Heartstopper. Then I finally finished Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. I started this novel back in December, and I put it down a couple of times because I didn't like it. I finally just decided to push through and finish it. And I still don't really like it. So Norwegian Wood is pretty much a coming-of-age story about a young man who is in college. It follows him and his way of dealing with these certain relationships that he's got with a few different people, a romantic relationship, a couple of friendships, and it just kind of like follows his like coming-of-age young man journey. And it wasn't my thing. I don't like it. I love Murakami. He does have certain things about his writing style, though, that when I come across them, they make me cringe. This is a common thing with Murakami. He has a lot of sexist elements to his writing, and there are certain things that I can accept in some of his other books because they have so many other elements that I just love so much. This book, though, it had all of the things that make me cringe, but it didn't have almost any of the other stuff that makes me love his books. There are definitely glimmers of what eventually I think became things that I really loved about his books in Norwegian Wood, but they're not that developed yet, and it just was mostly stuff I didn't care about or annoyed me. So, I didn't love Norwegian Wood. I didn't like it. It was my least favorite Murakami book I've ever read. Anyway, next book I read was The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. I won't talk too much about this one because I talked about it in my April wrap-up video, so you can check it out there, but it's part of a larger kind of trilogy. I kind of consider it a trilogy of her books, and it's really, really good. It's kind of like, it's like a crime novel, kind of, but it's very Emily St. John Mandel-like. It kind of has like these weird aspects and these kind of maybe sci-fi aspects, but you're not really sure. And they tie in with the other 2 books in the trilogy, and there's mystery and there's glam, and it's wonderful. I loved it. But if you're going to read it, read Station 11 first and then follow the order, as per what I said in the last video. Then I read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn, Hugo. This is by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is my first Taylor Jenkins Reid book. Her books are supposed to be really good. They're pretty heavily beloved by the people who love her, and I can see why. This was a very popular book, and it came out in like 2018 or something. It's about Okay, so the whole thing is like kind of an interview style where there's a main character and she's interviewing this starlet, this aging starlet. She's in her 80s now. Her name is Evelyn Hugo. And you're pretty much just getting her life story told as a story to this interviewer. And then they have their own little kind of plot themselves between the interviewer and Evelyn Hugo. But most of it is Evelyn Hugo's story, all revolving around why she had 7 husbands throughout her life. And the book is divided up into each husband. Every husband has his own story and represents a part of Evelyn Hugo's life. This book took me a little while to get into. There's a lot of like, to me it feels like very like uninteresting, like Hollywood drama kind of vibe, and I'm not that into that. But it also does become this really cool queer love story, which I wasn't expecting, and I was very happy to find in here. And that aspect of this story kind of made the whole story and book feel bigger and more important than what I went into it with. I really enjoyed this read. It was the kind of read that like just kept you going. I didn't want to put it down. And for much of it, I felt like I was just reading something like light and fluffy and fun. And then these other elements of like it actually having something to say really crept in there as well and really took over by the end. And I very much enjoyed it. And I really, really do want to read more of her books. If you're a fan of hers, tell me which one you think I should read next. I hear that some of her books share characters the way that Emily St. John Mandel's books do, and I'm really into that. So I really want to read things in order or whatever. So let me know. My very favorite book I've read so far this year is The 5 Wounds by Kristin Valdez Quade. It has the most little tabbies in it, I think. Out of all the books I've read so far, I loved this book with a deep passion. It is the story of a Chicano family living in New Mexico, and it's a grandmother and a son. His name is Amadeo, and his estranged 15-year-old pregnant daughter. He's been a deadbeat dad for his daughter's whole life. She shows up one day pregnant on his doorstep after not having seen him for a long time, and it's about the relationship, this like new kind of relationship that has to develop between father and daughter. And then a baby comes, and of course I love that aspect of it because like I'm kind of in baby land right now. And there were so many things in this book that were relatable to me, including the family dynamics, how people talk to each other in this book, the whole baby thing, like being a new mom and like having a newborn baby is like really well represented in here, I felt like. I don't know. It just, I loved this book. This book spoke to me. This book made me feel like someone knows that families like this exist because they did in my world growing up. And it was really cool to see it represented in really well-written literary fiction. I loved this book. And it was another book where I just wanted to keep reading and keep reading and keep reading. I loved it. The characters, it's kind of like a really intense character study. What she does, the author, is she kind of like gives you, I think like a year or so with this family, and it's not really like heavily plot driven. It's just kind of like presenting you with these people and how they live together and how they love each other. And in such a flawed way, there's so many bad things in this book that these people do and that happen to them. And I don't know. The way these people live their lives and are trying to live their lives and do it as best they can is just like so real. And I didn't know it was in fiction in the way that it is in this book. And I loved it. I loved it so much. Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is a Japanese translated fiction book, and it was cute. I liked it okay. It was cute. It's a beautiful book. It's like one of the most beautiful books I own, and it's like the most, like you see this like, I don't know, at the bookstore like front table, and you just want to like pick it up and take it home because it's so pretty. It's the story of a small cafe in Japan. It's a Japanese translated fiction. It's the story of a small cafe in Japan where you can go to time travel. Anybody can go here to time travel. You go there, you tell them you want to time travel, they pour you a cup of coffee, and before the coffee gets cold, you need to return to the present time or else you get stuck there. So that's kind of the basic premise. It's split up into either 3 or 4 vignettes, and it just follows a small cast of characters as they go through their daily lives, doing things in this cafe, and also each of their own individual time travel stories. It's good, it's fun, it's cute, it's nice. It didn't grab me the way I was hoping it was going to. I was very intrigued by the premise, and to me, the whole book fell a little flat, and I think I'm in the minority thinking that. A lot of people really, really love this book. I definitely recommend it if you're into reading something that's kind of like light and fun and kind of meandering. I don't know. Like I said, it fell a little flat for me, but it was really cool and really good, and a lot of people liked it. Okay. Next, I read Nimona. This is another graphic novel, and I loved it. It's by Noelle Stevenson. It's the only thing I've read by her. It's about this girl, Nimona, and she becomes the apprentice of Ballister Blackheart, who is the villain, and Sir Goldenloin is the hero. And they all live in this kind of like fictional, like kingdom kind of setting, but it's also kind of modern with its like, I don't know, weapons and its science and stuff like that. It's a really interesting like setting style, kind of like futuristic, archaic kind of kingdom thing. There's the resident hero, the arch nemesis, who is like the bad guy, the evildoer, and she comes in to help him do his thing, and it's really great. It's a really awesome take on the whole good versus evil kind of thing, because of course there's twists, and Ballister Blackheart is the protagonist in this book, even though he's the evil one. And, you know, of course you see all the different sides of like evil and like what makes people think other people are evil, and like she's just really funny. It's a very sarcastic, witty, funny, quick-moving kind of thing. It's just fun and it's lovely, and I loved this graphic novel. Here are some examples of some of the artwork in here. It's lovely. I definitely recommend this. I read this in like an evening. It's great. The last book I read in May was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is a pretty punk kind of book. It's got like a vague essence of shock value running through it, and it can be upsetting at times. This book, I think, is meant to upset you and piss you off and go, what the hell? Because it has something to say. It's pretty much about living in society not according to society's rules, and living for yourself rather than what other people want you to do, want you to be. It uses really extreme examples, in my opinion, to illustrate these facts, and because those examples are so extreme, it can be pretty upsetting. You can get pretty, like, I don't know. It's really good. It does what it does really well. Pretty much it's about a woman. She's, I think, in like her late 30s. She lives in Japan. She works at a convenience store. She's always worked at this convenience store ever since she's had a job. And, you know, she doesn't do things the way she's supposed to do them, according to her friends and her family and society and stuff. She's an interesting character who is not always relatable. But what I really loved about this book is how relatable her feelings toward her job were. Her workplace, which is the convenience store, is the one place where she actually feels really comfortable and at home, and has learned the rules of the convenience store and what it means to be a convenience store worker so well that she it describes the whole like flow state of like being good at your job really well. And I loved those parts. I loved those descriptions in this book. Yeah, so it's a short, quick, upsetting little piece of fiction that has something that it is trying to tell you, and it's really, really good. The first book that I read in June was Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. I listened to the audiobook, the author read it, it was wonderful. This is a memoir by Michelle Zauner, who is the woman behind Japanese Breakfast, the musical group, and it's a memoir that focuses a lot on her relationship with her mother. Michelle is Korean American and her mother moved to America from Korea, and her father is a white American man. It really focuses on her relationship with her mother in growing up, in Michelle growing older, and then throughout her mother's cancer diagnosis. It talks a lot about food and how food ties into their relationship and then moves on to tie into her own relationships with other people. Pretty much the big focuses of this memoir are motherhood, daughterhood, that mother-daughter relationship, and all of its good and bad stuff, and food, specifically Korean food. And I loved it. It was so good. It can be a little hard to read if you are part of a mother-daughter relationship that maybe experiences some of the similar things that she has experienced. Also, it talks a lot about being with her mother as she's going through cancer and treatments. So it can be a little hard to read at parts, but it's beautifully written. I loved it. I loved hearing the author read it, and the food stuff is just so good. I went on to find out that Michelle Zauner actually did a lot of YouTube videos with Vice's food channel on YouTube, and they're really good. Okay. Then I read this book. This is Hear the Wincing by Haruki Murakami. It is also Pinball 1973 by Haruki Murakami. These were his first two novels that got translated into English way after he got famous and popular in America with his translated fiction. And they're fine. I don't know. So Hear the Wincing is about another young man growing up, doing his thing, being a young man. And then Pinball 1973 is the continuation of his story a few years later. He's now out on his own. He has a business. He's obsessed with this pinball machine that he's trying to find. It's one of these stories where it's just kind of like this guy and his whole vibe. And it's pretty good, but it feels, as a Murakami fan, like really undeveloped Murakami. I enjoyed reading it okay, but I kind of just wanted to be done with it. It almost just kind of felt like an experiment. Like I just wanted to read it because it's Murakami's first novel. It was fine, but I don't know. There's a lot of like what's to come in here. I saw a lot of stuff in here that became reoccurring things in his books, only way more developed. And so pretty much like Norwegian would, I saw a lot of glimpses in here of what became things that I loved about Murakami, but there wasn't much in here that I loved. Maybe the pinball stuff was the best. But yeah, it was pretty good. But if you've never read Murakami, don't start with this. Start with The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle or Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, or Killing Commendator or Commendatore, or however you say it. Gallant by V.E. Schwab. This was the very first V.E. Schwab book I've ever read. I listened to it on audio book. It's her latest book, I believe, and it was pretty good. It's like, I want to say like a YA fantasy, and it's about a girl who lives in an orphanage who can see dead people or ghosts or ghouls. She can see ghouls. And she doesn't know anything about herself except for she has this journal that her mother left her before she died. And it's very dark and mysterious and creepy, and she doesn't quite understand it. She goes on to find her family and figure out where she's from and what her family does. It's the kind of fantasy where it's like, pretty much there's a house and then there's a border, a wall, and then on the other side of that border is like the other side of the world. It's like the world of death or something. And it turns out her family is the gatekeeper between those two worlds, and she has to find her place in that. and do what she needs to do as a member of this like family that keeps death at bay. And it was pretty good. It really honestly reminded me a lot of a Neil Gaiman book, or like a book that wanted to be a Neil Gaiman book, and it was enjoyable to read, but I didn't find much in it that I felt like didn't feel kind of derivative to me. So I enjoyed it. It was fun, but it wasn't like my favorite thing ever. I don't know if I'll read more V.E. Schwab, but we'll see. These are Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, and Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World. I read both of these books this last month, and these are by Benjamin Alire Saenz, who is a Chicano author, and I fell in love with them. I am in love with Aristotle and Dante. I love them. These books are fantastic. They are, I think they're probably YA, like literary fiction or something. I don't know. Contemporary fiction. I don't know the difference. They're about two young high school Mexican-American boys growing up in Texas in the 80s. They meet, form a really great friendship that is super fun to read about, and eventually fall in love, and then eventually have to learn how to navigate being gay in the 80s in Texas. And it's just so, oh, it's so beautifully written. I love these books. They were so fun to read. Every character in these books is just like perfect and wonderful, and you just want to eat these books up. You just want to devour them, and I did. I read them so fast. I loved them so much. Yeah, it's just about being. It's another set of books that it's about being a flawed person and trying to deal with being human. They're really good. Then I read a book of poetry called Heart Like a Window, Mouth Like a Cliff by Sarah Borjas. She's a Chicana poet. This is her first book of poetry, I think. And I read this super fast because I loved it so much. So much. I tabbed all my favorite poems. They're all about being Mexican American in the United States, about not being Mexican enough, about being too Mexican, about family relationships, heavy on the mother-daughter relationships in this collection of poetry again. And it's wonderful. I loved it so, so much. This is like my favorite collection of poetry I've read in a really, really long time. Some of the structures in here, like a lot of, I think, modern poetry are just like interesting structurally. And I'm just super into it. There was a lot of stuff in here, again, that I found really relatable, and I enjoyed reading every single poem in here. It was absolutely a delight. Some are lighthearted, some are pretty dark, and it's wonderful. I loved these poems. Next book I read was The Iliac Crest by Cristina Rivera Garza. This is another translated work. This was translated from Spanish. This is a Mexican author, and it's really weird and really good. This I would call kind of like Kafka-esque fiction. It's very dreamy and very weird, and things don't make sense the way they make sense in the real world in this book. I want to say it's pretty gothic too. I would definitely call this gothic fiction for sure. I don't even know. It's about a man who takes in a woman from the storm into his house where he lives on the seaside, and he's a doctor in a mental health institution. And also his ex-lover comes the same night, and they both start living with him weirdly and speaking their own language that they make up together, and he's very like disturbed by both of them and what they do and what they're doing to him mentally. And he goes on these weird adventures trying to like get them out of his life because they're like ruining his life. It's weird. It's also got this other like weird sci-fi element of being disappeared and like it being like a medical condition. There's lots of stuff that isn't explained in this book that is just, you know, it's metaphorical. There's lots of metaphors in this book. One of the main characters, the woman that he takes in from the storm, is Amparo Davila, who was a Mexican woman who was an author a long time ago. I don't know when, in the 40s maybe? I don't know, something like that. And I think this book is like the fictionalized character of Amparo Davila has a lot to say about Amparo Davila's life, which is like she was a woman author in Mexico in a time where that didn't really happen, and she got kind of swept under the rug, and so it's like trying to bring out like this whole like women in, I don't know, there's a lot going on here. It's really good though. It's like I said, it's really weird. It's gonna make you do some research if you read it. It's strange and it's good, and I really am glad I read it, and I'm glad I did the research that I did after I was done reading it. This is Night at the Fiestas, also by Kristin Valdez Quade. She's the author who wrote The Five Wounds, and this is her other book that she has, and it's a short story collection. I was very excited about it. It's good, but it didn't give me another Five Wounds, which is what I wanted. The style is similar in that she gives you just like this like glimpse of life into these people's lives, and that's it. There's like, you know, there's not like any closure in any of these stories. It's just what she wants to say about life, oftentimes about being like a Mexican girl or woman or something in the world. And you just get kind of a glimpse of it, a picture of it, and what these people do in these stories. So it's really good, but it wasn't as good as her novel. So the last book that I read in June was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I loved Circe. I read that a while ago. I've been wanting to read The Song of Achilles for a while, and I finally did it. I listened to it on audiobook, and it was great. It's a Greek mythological retelling of the story of Achilles as told from the perspective of Patroclus, who was Achilles' lover and like life partner. And it was great. I freaking love Greek mythological retellings. I really, really do. I'm reading another one right now, and I kind of want to read them all. And this was just another one that was really good. It gave a perspective on the story of Achilles that was a little more human, a little softer, a little gentler, and like more humanistic in terms of like how he became who he became and like who was behind that person. Like he shows him from a kid all the way until his death. And it's just told in a really great perspective through the storytelling lens of a modern woman. Everything about Song of Achilles was just as wonderful as Circe. If you're into like modern feminist perspective retellings of Greek mythologies, it's definitely one to read. I love stuff like that. The only reason I think I didn't love Song of Achilles as much as Circe is because of the nature of the subject, because much of the book takes place in war, throughout the War of Troy. I don't know what the actual war was called, but where they go to Troy and they try to get Helen back, that whole thing. So it's like all on battlefields. It's the story of a war, and I'm kind of not into that. Like that, that kind of makes me glaze over a little bit. But other than that, it was fantastic. I loved it. And I mean, I think you got to be into like Greek mythology and like the idea of a modern retelling and like kind of a deeper dive into certain characters of Greek mythology. I loved it. It was great. Okay, that's it. Those are all 21 books that I read in the last 2 months. Thank you for being here. I'm excited that you decided to listen to me talk about books in a really quick and vaguely incoherent way for however long this is. So thank you for being here. I very much appreciate it. If you feel like it, please do give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're interested in joining my Patreon, it's down there too, or whatever. And I would love to hear about what you read in the last couple months. What is your summer reading looking like? I would love to know. I'm reading a couple really great books right now that I can't wait to tell you about the next time I do a book video. So until then, happy reading. Love you and goodbye.